Today, we are exploring the topic of HR's role in business agility. Now, this is a bit of a hot topic in the sense that my common quote at the moment is there's nothing like a pandemic to demonstrate the need to work in an agile way. So we've got organizations across the globe transforming, and this was already happening, and we'll kind of talk about this. So we've got organizations transforming, going more agile, and we'll have a look at what does that mean. And there is a key role for HR to play in this. And this also leads to why would HR themselves start to embrace a more agile way of working and mindset. And indeed, will we be called HR in the future? So I've got a wonderful guest today from the business agility coaching side, and we thought we'd like to team up and kind of debate these kind of topics together. So I'm going to ask Rahul to introduce himself and say a few words. Over to you.
Hey, Natal. Yes, thank you. Pleasure to be here. My name is Rahul, and I work as a business agility coach. And I see this more as a role rather than a title, right? So focusing on the entire organizational effectiveness of building a product or a service and solving these customer problems. So that's what I do. I work with a company called Delivery Hero here in Berlin for now. I also do freelance work with other clients, as well as trainings for individuals that you can learn about on my website that's shown down there. So yeah, nice to see everyone here and good to see a number of people.
Fantastic. And I'm Natal Dank, for anyone that's not aware of who I am. And I head up the coaching, learning and community at PXO Culture. And we're all about helping you build people experience and operations. And I also wrote a book called Agile HR, which we'll talk a little bit about. And please link up with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or come over to PXO Culture and we can explore this topic at any time. So over to Rahul to have a little shout out about some of the things that he does before we get going. Over to you, Rahul.
Thanks, Natal. Yes, thanks for pulling this up. So as I was talking to earlier, I do offer some trainings, transformations with different organizations, and talks like the one we're doing today. You can learn more about it on my website, but the images above give you a snapshot of what type of trainings, especially the individual ones, you can expect to attend from me. And I see Veronica on here as one of the guests. She's attended one of mine. So hey, Veronica, good to see you again. If you want to learn more, please reach out to me, either LinkedIn or through the forum on my website, and I'd be happy to chat further.
Fantastic. And we said there would be a shout out. So shout out for the book. If you don't have it already, you can get 20% off at PXO Culture. And we're getting some amazing feedback that it is a really practical toolkit, which is what we aimed to achieve when writing it. And at PXO Culture, we do a lot of meetups on these topics. The next one, however, is a little bit different, where you can ask me anything you want within the realms of people experience and Agile HR. But really happy to do kind of mini coaching sessions, go through what's happening for you, look at your own Kanban, anything you want to kind of touch on, we can explore in that session. So please feel free to join me next week. It's an open-ended, no set theme, so it will be exciting to see how it goes. And then we do a lot of learning initiatives, particularly with in-house teams. How do you build your new operating model? How do you start to build business agility for your organization? We also, however, do some great public events, and we've got one coming up with Tracy Waters, who is a bit of an Agile HR legend, and we run an experiment meetup where we take people through how to set up a HR experiment. It's lots of fun. So that's a 3-hour event on the 25th of March. And then we have core programs for HR people and people in culture, organizational change, on how to actually learn how to apply Agile in your own work and your project. So you can come over to PXO Culture and check those out. Okay, let's get into it. We would love to know what's your interest in this topic? So what's your role or your function? For example, are you HR or are you more on the business agility coaching side? And what's interesting you in this topic? What do you need to know? Are you trying to learn more? Are you working with someone like Rahul and you want to kind of explore that relationship? Do you just want to understand what business agility is? So tell us a little bit more about what you'd like to know about this topic. Okay, so about to start a new role developing HR systems and processes in an agile way. Okay, interesting, Ian. The combination of tech and HR really does open up this opportunity of agile in such a new way. Currently a talent professional, want to learn more about the topic. Fabulous. I'm in HR transformation and massive interest in agile. We have a product manager, big fan of agile mindset and work or life in general. Fabulous. I know Rahul's a big believer of the whole life approach, and we can talk through that. We have a reward manager. Fabulous. Adore the agile mindset and want to learn more about applying agile in people practices. Fantastic. We've got an ops lead. Fabulous. UK and Kenya. Part of my role is a people lead and need to develop a new people and culture strategy. Fantastic. HR business partner. Got very inspired by Agile HR and did the workshop when I used to be at the community. Fabulous. Business development, and we put human back into HCM. Nice. That's what we want to see. We can debate the title of HCM. We've got a change manager trained as an agile project manager practitioner and an agile change lead. Really interested in hearing more about HR in business agility, especially considering organizational development. Great. We're going to touch on that. We've got a reward director looking at using agile and HR transformation. Fabulous. Starting a new role soon and business wants to become more agile. Hot topic. I will be leading the people capability side of this, getting as much insight on approaches as I can. Fabulous. Someone coaches an IT unit, fabulous, through their transformation, helping them become more agile, effective, and form a value stream. Excellent. All right. So we've got a nice mixture, Rahul, of people from the HR side embracing agile or working with people like yourself, and then, of course, a few fellow business agility coaches as well. So please, what we really want to know is your questions throughout this discussion. So what would you like to look at on this topic? We've got some set questions to discuss, but we will go over to your questions as soon as they start coming in. So please let us know through chat. Okay, we're going to do a bit of an introduction to the topic and then get into the discussion. And a lot of this is looking at the new kind of HR, or what we like to call people experience and operations, for the future of work. And we keep saying the future of work, but I feel like we're in it. So we really are building new ways of working each day at the moment. And this is based much more on the collaboration of teams working in a network and this ability to try and get really close as you can to your customer to look at how you deliver value directly to that customer. And so this is a new mindset that's really starting to transform organizations, but this is also an amazing mindset that we can take into the world of HR ourselves. And I was looking at a great TED talk the other day where the person actually presented the amount of money we spend on enriching the customer experience versus the amount of money we currently spend on enriching the employee experience, even though we say our people are central to achieving our goals. So really interesting, isn't it? How could we start to use the same techniques, the same sophistication in building great moments that matter in our workplace, just as much as building great moments that matter for our customers? So a lot of what Rahul and I do is helping people translate the concept of agile and the agile mindset into different parts of the business, because it did come from a manifesto that was written 20 years ago, and this is our little celebration today, but it can feel a little bit techie when you first read it. And so it's always about how do we start to translate that into our ways of working. And for HR, this is very much your people sitting at the heart of what you do as your customer, but also understanding if you can help your people be great, the value flows through to your business and your end customer. So we really are thinking about that value stream as well. And then we aim to deliver that value incrementally, slice by slice, piece by piece. And as we know, in Agile, you need all the skills in the team to get the job done. So this is how do we build multifunctional, multi-skilled, T-shaped teams. And in the world of HR, this is actually quite different to how we've worked before. So this is breaking down the Ulrich model, breaking down these silos, these topic owners that we've often worked in, and coming together to solve business problems in a more collaborative way. So the message today is that HR needs to be agile to enable agile. So there's no use sort of helping an organization transform if we don't know what this means ourselves. And I don't know about you, Rahul, but really, you've got to experience agile, don't you, to kind of understand what it means. I found that myself. So imagine if people like Rahul and I started to work really closely together, imagine what we could achieve in these organizations. And this kind of whole agile transformation has been a bit of a kind of utopia for a little while. But I think if we start to work closer and closer and understand each other, then we really can get we can start to get there, because the people practices of an organization have so much influence on its ability to be agile. And that's what we want to explore in this session. So we're talking about business agility, but what does it actually mean? I'm going to ask our business agility coach to comment on this. What's your thoughts, Rahul?
To me, business agility comes down to assessing the goal that you have. And that goal is typically not to be agile for the sake of it or to do agile, right? And using agile ways of working, the values, the principles underlined in the manifesto that you mentioned, to use it as a means to that end, right? A lot of times in conversations that I've had when I've worked with different organizations and clients, people come up to me and say, we want to be agile. We want to do agile practices. Can you help us do that? And the question that I ask is, what do you want to achieve with that, right? Why do you want to do these agile practices, right? And I really like the way that you worded it in the earlier slide about being agile, right? And then using agility as a means to the end, whatever goal that you want to achieve as an organization, as a department, or as a team. So to me, business agility is about focusing on this entire organization to effectively build product or service to solve these customer problems, right? And the customer problems, again, would vary across the different layers of customers that you have within and outside your company, including the end user or the final customer. But looking at really the effectiveness of how you're going to solve the problem, which problems you're going to solve, prior to focusing on the efficiency of it, right? I think a lot of team level agility is often focused on delivery efficiency, right? And agility can be really good and really powerful for optimizing your efficiency. But to me, the reason I use the term business agility is before you start thinking about that, you want to think about, are we working on the right things? Are we tackling the right problems? And so to me, it sort of gives a sense of holistic company strategy and the why behind you're doing things and delivering things and looking at things like product discovery and so on. So to me, this is what business agility really boils down to.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think so many times, even if it's your team or whether it's the whole organization, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And this is much as if you're in HR or you're in a business team, you need to know the problem you're trying to solve. So if you're a HR team, are you needing to modernize the way you work? Are you even trying to digitalize, or you're trying to deliver more value to the business? So what is the problems you're trying to solve? If you're an organization, is it that you're trying to respond to a more competitive landscape? Are you trying to innovate? Are you trying to, disrupt? What is the purpose? And then Agile serves that purpose as a way other than the other way around, isn't it? So there is a big danger of kind of the announcement, we're going Agile, and it's all about going Agile as opposed to what you're trying to achieve with it.
Yeah, and a lot of transformations that I see as well, focus on the implementation of Agile practices, right? Without truly understanding the meaning and the value behind a lot of these practices. So my job as the business agility coach is to help make that very clear from the start, to define the value, where agility can be applied, how it can be applied, and then allowing the team to come up with specific ways of doing that within their own context.
Yeah, no, I think really like that. And just touching up on what you were talking about earlier, which is this idea of effectiveness before efficiency. And Rahul and I, before this session, were exploring, well, what's some of the core values you like to take away from the Agile Manifesto and help people kind of understand what it means in their area. And for the one that I always sort of go to for HR is this idea of people before process. And this resonates with the first part of the manifesto, which is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So and I don't know about you, but in HR, the amount of times I said, oh, but it's about the conversation, not the tool or the form that you've got to fill in, if we think maybe performance management or something like that. So this is, how do we build user-centric solutions that help people be good in their job, and then look at what the process needs to be around that. Don't go for the process first. One that I heard recently on when I was on a panel for the Scrum Alliance's celebration of the manifesto was this great one around purpose before productivity. So this is another thing that we often associate Agile with, to be more productive. And this is a great outcome and a great result that you ultimately can have. But if you go off to be productive first of all, then what is the purpose? What's the problem you're trying to solve? And I think there is a real danger sometimes where Agile transformation gets closely linked to cost cutting, efficiency, and productivity before the actual purpose and what you're trying to achieve. Would you like to comment on that at all, Rahul? What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. And just to sort of expand on that, and to give you a more realistic sense of how it is that I help organizations with agility, including in spaces like HR, is it's nice to start, especially in hierarchical organizations, up at the top, right? So you want to create this alignment from the top down as well as the bottom up, so that the autonomy can be enabled, right, at the team level, at the department level. Without that initial alignment about what is the goal that you want to get to, what is the problem you want to solve, no matter how many agile practices that you do, you would fall short of achieving your goal or your target or your mission and so on, right? So it's really useful to think about this in terms of starting with the goal, filtering down the alignment, so that you can enable teams and departments to come up with their own contextual solutions. And on that topic, there's a model I've developed called a needs-oriented model of coaching, where you look at the different layers within an organization through the organization itself, the team level, the individual, and the self, and trying to get more context at every level to figure out and to help you solve the right things.
I like that. We had a meetup last week where we were exploring Agile HR in a startup. And one of the answers around, well, how do you kind of create some structure and discipline when you still want to have this autonomy and innovation and entrepreneurship that is so rich in a startup? And the answer was that, Rahul, it was about giving some parameters and boundaries through OKRs and through goals, but allowing people to still make the key decisions on how they were going to get there. And it was a really, and a lot of the discipline came from the Agile cadence. So doing retrospectives, doing reviews, doing planning, and having that, repetitive nature of how you worked. So it's really interesting how Agile business agility can come through the practices and through the beliefs, isn't it? And the values. And that's what it's all about. You don't have to prescribe necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. And OKRs can be a good tool for goal setting. I've seen it misused as well, right? Yes, so it again boils down to whether it's something that would fit your context. But back to your question about the Agile manifesto, I think firstly, it's a testament for the manifesto, right? That it stood the test of time for the past 20 years. And yeah, a lot of times the value that you focus on, these tools and processes becomes apparent, right? Whereas you should really focus on the initial why you're doing certain things, what is the purpose of your work, as well as the practices that you're having. So I think it boils down to that, as well as having this feedback loop that you were talking to earlier, Natal, and collaborating with your users, your different levels of customers, as well as your internal team members.
Yeah, definitely. And it was interesting, actually, just on that, in the panel that I was on, there was this debate about, do we need to change the words of the manifesto? Mm-hmm. And there is actually different versions of it out there. There's one for HR, for example. But what I found in those forums is that it becomes this big debate about words, as opposed to what are we trying to achieve with all of this? So I agree with you. It's about taking the manifesto and then making sure it's relevant for everyone and helping them understand it. We don't need to really reinvent the wheel as such. So it's an interesting debate. Okay, so a lot of what we're talking about here is this co-creation of the employee experience. And we're looking at, well, what is the experience that people need to have to feel that they can achieve the business agility that the organization is setting out? So what and what is HR's role in that? How do we help people really connect with the purpose and vision? How do we enable them to be able to make those decisions and get the job done and then collaborate effectively in those teams? How do we help the value stream understand that end-to-end accountability? Do we need to look at how we do some organizational design or organizational development to help that? And sometimes that's actually stripping out some of the HR processes that are in existence. So, if we think about the feedback loop of Agile, there's some amazing performance conversations already happening in that each day. How much do we need to add processes onto that? Is it about helping that be as effective as it can be? So this is something to start thinking about in the world of HR. How do we also take on some of the roles that Rahul and others does to keep enabling agile ways of working to happen? Because that's where you're going to get the great performance. So as we said earlier, please let us know your questions. We would love to discuss your focus today. So just pop them into chat and then we will pick them up as they come in and go through them. But we'll go over to the first pre-prepared question, just like in the cooking shows. Okay, Rahul, let's have a look. So you have partnered with many HR and people and culture professionals like myself. So what's been your experiences in your role as a business agility coach? Talk us through what it's been like to work with people like me.
Yeah, happy to. So there's a wide range of topics under the HR umbrella, right? So a lot of times it starts off by clarifying what it is that we mean when we use the term HR, right? What departments are included, what objectives do we want to achieve? So to me, again, it starts there. And it's really interesting when I think about the previous value that HR brought, as well as through conversations with you, Natal, the predominantly hire and fire, the Ulrich model, the admin duties and paperwork. Maybe there was a time where that was highly valued for an organization. I think the value of HR now is moving towards the soft skills and more of the knowledge work, where you're working with individual contexts, helping in conflicts, offering different growth opportunities to individuals, working on things like organizational culture, making sure, as you said, Natal, they're not just fluffy words, but they're actually actionable things, as well as internal and external communication, right? So to me, when I think about the value of HR now in especially tech product companies, this is what I think about, as well as maybe matching, thinking about the people experience from the time someone joins the organization to the end, and the potential growth for the individual as well.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, because we did discuss that we should define what HR is, particularly for this conversation. And I totally agree with you. I think that we're talking about HR more than just hiring and firing, which is what we've often been associated with. And a lot of people know HR maybe through recruitment or perhaps when something happens, so the grievance, the discipline. And what we're talking about is HR coming in and truly being a partner around organizational design and organizational development. And there's so much that sits in there. But yes, definitely that's starting to take on more of a coaching lens rather than, and a consulting lens rather than this sort of compliance-driven function. Great. Thank you so much, Rahul.
Yeah, to expand a little more about my experience, I've had some good experiences where I worked with people such as people partners in the people partner role, also sometimes called the business partner role, where this person flagged an issue with one of the department leads in a previous organization I was working with. So she brought me into the conversation, and together we dissected the conflict into personal and predominantly process-related conflicts, right? And so this is where I see a lot of the synergies between someone like myself in the business agility coaching role or an agile coaching role to partner with someone from the HR space to tackle the problem, to look at it from the angle of agile and the angle of HR, and to break it down into the different parts. So, in this specific case, I did a few sessions with the department to make their workflow really transparent, right? To break it down into what we are talking about and making it clear to everyone in there, and then co-creating with the team a solution specific to different parts of the value stream or the workflow. Another example is I'm working right now with the global corporate comms team at Delivery Hero here in Berlin. And one of the things I'm working with the department there is on focusing more on the impact that they want to have and starting with that, using that as a starting point, rather than going off and starting projects or marketing campaigns. Because at the end of the day, a lot of these HR teams work as enabling functions, right? Enabling other departments or other users in the company to do what they do and to do that better. And sometimes you can get stuck in the hamster wheel of completing more and more work that comes in through the intake process, right? So in this case, the team vision and mission was there, but it was over-engineered a little bit with lots of words, phrases, and therefore it wasn't really applicable to the team's day-to-day work. So something I'm working with them to do is to simplify this and connecting it to their day-to-day work. Again, in this case, we are using the OKR framework to start with the objectives that we want to achieve and then use measurable key results for the different campaigns and projects that they want to implement. A pre-mortem is another really good exercise here. This was, I think, popularized in Amazon, where you start with what it is that you're trying to achieve in the next 5 years, right? So do this time traveling scenario. Start with that goal if everything has gone well, and then work backwards from there, right? And to try and get to that goal. Processes like these and practices like that show you how every small piece of work that you do at the individual level helps move your tribe or your department or your team towards your company vision. I've also had a bad experience working with HR related roles, where at another organization, I set up a chat with, in this case, the people partner once again, and talk about how we could work together, where we could identify some pockets of maybe training improvements or conflict resolution, or maybe organizational design, as you alluded to earlier, Natal. And to clarify, when I mean organizational design, it's things like creating teams and breaking teams. There's a really cool book by the name of Dynamic Reteaming. A colleague of mine by the name of Heidi Helfand writes about this, about org design. So if you're interested, give that book a check. But so, back to the scenario where I set up this call with the business partner, the people partner, to talk about these things. The people partner basically drew the line there, right? And said, this is my territory, this is yours. It's better if we focus on our different parts. And I'm not sure if we can benefit one another, right? So I think at the end of the day, you want to think about what you want to achieve as a company, right? And how different departments, different roles can help you achieve that, right? And so in this case, there wasn't further interaction. And to me, it's a bit sad, right? Because we're working in a similar space of creating an environment where individuals can thrive, from an HR perspective, from a coaching perspective, from an agility perspective, and so on. So to me, I think there can be a lot of really nice synergies and overlaps to talk about, such as creating trainings for employees, maybe career pathing a little bit, conflict resolution, and much more, right? So those are some experiences that I've had.
Excellent, thank you. I think it's very interesting, and great, we've got the name of the book has come up. So we just had a question on what was the name of the book that you mentioned. Is it correct? Dynamic Reteaming, the Art and Wisdom of Changing Teams. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. And the author is Heidi Helfand. Yeah.
Great. Excellent. So yes, I think what's interesting I find about the world of Agile and HR is that I think up until now, we haven't always understood each other. And I know a number of years when I started the Meetup back in London, when we actually saw people face to face and had drinks and things like that, there was this sort of new world of HR people and Agile coaches kind of getting to know each other and sort of understanding that they could actually have the same goals. And I think when Agile coaches came into organizations, HR could be seen as a blocker because of some of the processes and systems that were at play. But then HR didn't necessarily understand what agile coaches were trying to do, because maybe they were presented with someone that just wanted to change everything, and they were like, oh, but there's bigger, things are interconnected, and we need to think about the whole kind of way of changing this organization in a holistic way. So I think we're starting to really understand each other, and I think that's great. There's also this danger that HR represents the legacy of traditional ways of working with some of our processes. And so part of that is working together to change them for the better, and showing that it is more human-centric and not just about managing people as resources, which I think is really key. But I think what's really interesting is that what's coming out from what you're saying, Rahul, is that to achieve business agility, so much of it is around how do you build great people kind of strategy and solutions, and it's how do you build this great experience for people. It's less, in some ways, even about the product you're necessarily producing. That's kind of an outcome of this great environment that you're creating to work, and that's where some of the best work comes from. So I think the role that we can play is so important. Rahul, I'm going to bring in some questions because we've already had a few, and they sort of, what the first one picked up on a little bit of what you were saying earlier, so I thought it's worthwhile bringing it in already. And that is just going back to what you were saying around OKRs. And we've just got, Rahul, can you expand on situations where using OKRs didn't fit the context? So you mentioned, I've seen them not quite work, and I have too, but any comments you want to have on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of it, again, and you'll hear me say this throughout the talk, is so contextual, right? So to be more specific, past experiences where OKR has not worked so well is mainly around the environment, where the use of OKRs is by top level management to track individual performance, right? And to see, what is this X person doing, or what is this specific role contributing to. And to me, when you think about the OKR framework, it's about the holistic achievement that you want to have at the different levels, at the different flight levels in an organization, right? So if you're setting OKRs at the team level, you want to think about, again, the objectives, how you can measure that objective, whether you're on the right track. Leading and lagging indicators are really good tools that you can use for these key results, and then breaking that down into the outputs or the tasks that you can have to achieve it. So to answer the question, one that really comes to mind off the top of my head is where it's really used as a tool to track individual performance. Right. And I think this, the people in the HR space on this call can probably relate to, right? I think this is something that maybe has a bad reputation and hasn't been used in the best way possible, because, the feedback that you give, and Natalia, you mentioned these different feedback loops with using agility, using agile ways of working. That doesn't really work in the best way when you use that to talk about performance, right? Because it doesn't create a safe space for people to honestly share constructive feedback. So again, I like decoupling this, decoupling the feedback and making it really specific and actionable to the rewards that each individual person can get. So for the OKRs, you want to be using it to achieve holistic goals rather than track individual performances. So that's one example that comes to my head.
Yeah, no, I think it's really great. And what's interesting is that you'll also, where I've seen it not be successful, is when you're trying to fit the OKR model onto a pre-existing performance management approach, which is sort of a little bit similar to what you're saying there. And then suddenly it's not about people setting their own, goals to feed into the vision. It's about goals getting cascaded down, or as you said, tracking individual performance rather than how are we collectively achieving our goals. And I think that's really important. Get to understand the kind of the purpose and the essence of OKRs. And again, this is where when Agile is trying to be fitted on top of something that's already there, that's where you can really you have some big blockers on what you're trying to do. I really like the next question, Rahul, because it's a little bit like some of the things that we've been talking about. So can you talk a little bit about the basic condition in order to be successful based on your experiences? So, you've got your sponsor, you've got your purpose, but can you talk us through a little bit more around how do you kind of, build this approach to business agility, where would you start? Is there any sort of key questions that you would ask to assess the situation, for example?
To break it down, I typically start at the top. If you're working with hierarchical organizations where you have the C-level, VP level, director level, and so on. So it starts at the top again with the alignment, right? So making sure that there's a well-defined organizational vision there, making sure that vision then translates into the mission or something like a product strategy. This is typically done at the VP level at larger organizations. Looking at the product strategy, which is the what and the why, and then translating that into those departmental OKRs or roadmaps or smaller measurable chunks of work that you want to do. And then at the team level, taking that and translating it into short-term planning, right? So the levels of planning, again, are getting smaller and smaller in scope. You're starting with something that's 1 year or a couple of years wide or big, and then that breaks down into the team level sprints, for example, 2-week cadences. So to me, it starts with this outward in approach of starting by looking at what it is that the company is trying to achieve, and how that can be broken down into the product strategy, into roadmaps, and into smaller measurable chunks of work that you're doing. So I hope that answers the question.
No, that's really good. Thank you. And my sort of a more systematic approach to it. I very much like the concept of the needs. What is it? Needs level coaching. So what?
Yeah, the needs oriented model of coaching. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, so we've got one that's slightly, well, doesn't fully link, but it's a great question that you can debate for a long time, but we'll do a quick one. So what's the ideal size of an Agile team?
When I think about agility, it's a mindset, it's a way of working. It's not really a prescription of a team size or team list of practices. So I don't know if I can answer that question. If you're referring to a Scrum team by the Scrum Guide, which was updated a couple of months ago in November 2020, the suggested team size is 3 to 9 teams, because the reason being under 3 people, it's usually a bit of an overhead to have these different ceremonies because there's a lot more frequent organic interaction between those 2 members. And typically you don't want it to be too much larger than 9 people in Scrum, because then it gets harder to manage and therefore you need much more coordination involved within the team. And I've worked with teams in the past with 12, 13 people that are working in Scrum that are really working well, right? So I would use these as heuristics rather than written in stone, things that are written in stone. But to answer your question about Agile teams, I don't know if such a thing exists. No.
Yeah, I agree. And it's about the size that can work effectively together based on the dynamics, based on what you're trying to achieve. I think what's interesting, if you take it from a HR perspective, is we often start from a point where we've got a lot of people that are single topic owners, and there's a lot of business as usual as well as strategic work. So you might have a bigger team kind of working together day to day, but then you might need to think about how do you actually come together in different sort of units to actually get certain work done. And then over time, how do you become more this team that can take things from the Kanban board or the Scrum board to achieve as a team, as opposed to just taking things individually. And that takes a while. So I think the more people you put into that mix, the harder it is to begin with. But it doesn't necessarily stop you. I know I've done a session with Jeff Sutherland, one of the writers of Scrum, and he says 5, between 3 and 9, and therefore it's 5. But he can be a bit arbitrary like that.
Yeah, and I think this question could be as well a good segue into something that we want to cover in this talk, Natal, which was, the synergies, right? How can HR have agility? So, since we're talking about teams, for example, you want to have these cross-functional teams. I think that you were referring to, Natal, earlier as well, where you can have a person from the HR field, along with maybe someone from UX, someone from the marketing team, someone like an Agile coach, if we're trying to address specific problems, right? So what you have, the benefit you get from having such a cross-functional team, even if it is temporary, is this global outlook on the problem that we're trying to solve, right? And different perspectives and different specialties as well. So you get this global representation. And what you want to do with such a team is then get specialized into the local context of the team, of the part of the organization that you're working with. So a really good example of how you can do that is in the Agile space, we have something called walk the Gemba, which means go to the place where the action is happening and sit with them to understand how the people are thinking, how they're working, right? And observe, right? And not necessarily go in there and prescribe different things or different options. You want to first go to this Gemba, understand how people are thinking and working to get this context, right? And to understand their vernacular. And so when I think about HR people, the question that comes to mind is how many people in the HR space work with specific teams, departments for days, weeks, or months at a time, or even sit in on their different team meetings, process, and so on, right? Not too many that I've seen. So I think there's a huge scope of when we think about holistic people experience, you want to experience the part of that value chain that you want to think about, right? And how you can do that is by using something like the Gemba, where you have this cross-functional team and you go sit with a specific team or department before you try to maybe send out surveys or come up with a solution or a process around their payroll, around their hiring, around their trainings, and so on. So to me, that's a really good starting point, rather than being siloed in an ivory tower within the people experience department, and then trying to do things for the other departments without really getting a feel of what it is that they're doing.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is where using concepts, also like design thinking, so going and really, deeply immersing yourself in the user experience. What is going on for them? Exploring the topic from their angle, and don't even go anywhere near a solution yet. Just go and explore and find out what are the actual problems you're trying to solve. Just like we were talking about earlier, if you were to go and do something about redesigning this process, why is the process even there in the first place? Does it need to be there? All of those kind of questions. And I've seen people do this in a really interesting way. And things like that sometimes seem really clear, like career development. Oh, everyone thinks, oh, well, it's about getting your next job. Actually, if you go and explore that with people, career development can mean so many different things. It can even mean just how I work with the rest of my team. So this is where for HR to go and get into the user experience is such an enriching way of working. Excellent. So, Rahul, I'm going to kind of draw on that because we've talked a bit about teams. You've talked about a bit about working with HR to develop teams. And we do have a question that's come in that links into that as well. So let's explore that. I am currently working on a reorganization where the leaders have asked for an agile team structure. And I'm sure you've come across this situation before. What is your experiences of reorganizing operational teams into agile?
Yeah, it's very hard to understand what agile team structure means, right? Yeah. So I would start off by trying to clarify that and bring some transparency around, again, what are they trying to achieve by having these agile shaped teams or agile type of teams. Trying to understand the terminology, trying to understand what this person, the leadership, the management wants to achieve with that, and then trying to work towards that, right? So I think in agile ways of working, there's nothing wrong with having operational teams. You can have cross-functional teams depending on the context, but if you're working, for example, as IT support, right, you're working as this component team, and a lot of your work is based on the requests that come in, right, from time to time, from day to day. And this prevents you from maybe planning too much of the mid-level planning or the long-term planning. So I think there's nothing wrong with that, right? I think there's a need for having component teams, for having product teams and feature teams. I think that the space that they exist in should be evaluated, right? So based on what it is that you want to achieve with this tribe or with this team, does it make sense to have a cross-functional team to achieve your target by having representation of these different skill sets? Or is it better served by you acting more as a component team, maybe with specialists in their role. Yeah. So again, it would really tie back to what it is that this team or department is trying to achieve. And that should drive the conversation around what sort of team you would like to have and what sort of makeup of that team you would like to have.
And so would you say, Rahul, there's a danger that of diving into just sort of one team or one part of the business with your agile reorganization? Or, you've got to start somewhere, this idea of, do you kind of create an experiment before you then build it across the organization? Or do we need to think holistically from the beginning? What's your sort of thoughts around this debate?
Yeah, I think a bit of both, Natal. So I think you can start in the different pockets because then you have this context, right, that I was referring to. I think to be really effective in any change management or in any coaching roles, you need to have this global overview of course, what it is that your department or your organization wants to achieve. So you want to have this global overview, and then you want to as well get the localized context. So it's a bit of both, I think. And then once you have those two things, you can start by seeing how that team or how that department within the organization fits into the company's vision or mission or the strategy, and then take it from there, right? And then think about what are the different ways that we can optimize for this, and then think more about the efficiency that I was referring to earlier.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's again, it's always trying to keep the big picture in mind as well as kind of moving forward at that sort of micro level. And I think that's what Agile is about in many ways, isn't it? This idea that the complexity, you need to do multiple things at the same time, and so how do you keep moving forward in that way, and also allow things to emerge, because that's the only way to kind of learn and to grow, is to get the data of what works and what doesn't. Fantastic. Okay, so the danger here is blueprinting. I think the organization restructuring and design, and I would say I see that too many times when it comes to this topic of business agility. So we're going agile, and here's how we're going to set up all the teams, and this is what it's going to look like, and this is how it's going to run. And then sure enough, it doesn't work particularly straight away. So there is this kind of, how do you embrace this emergent way of building a reorganization while having that core vision of where you're going? And it's a hard balance to get, isn't it? And I think that there is a danger of also using some of the scaling models as that predetermined structure.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that, I forget who the person was that asked about the Agile setup, the Agile teams. But, to me as well, when I work with different clients, different organizations, what's really useful from the start is to not use words like agility, like having agile teams, and really trying to get behind the vernacular and to understand what it is that you're talking about, make that transparent, make sure that everyone agrees on that, and then moving on from there and being really pragmatic in that sense.
We've got a question that sort of links a little bit into one of ours. So I'll ask you that question, and then we can also move to the one that we had organized, Rahul. So the first one, can you give us any tips on how we can encourage applying an agile mindset at the top, so director level, and that and how that can become a default thinking for them? I find I can occasionally get there with individual projects, but it's hard to keep that consistency from both the top and the bottom. So what's your thoughts in here? And that kind of flows a little bit into how do we start to change the environment. So let's start with, tips for building agile mindset at top, and then we can take it into the next question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It depends on the organization you're with, right? And the approach and the product or the service you're trying to build, obviously. I think with tech products, it can be easier because the applications for agility are a little more evident, especially with tech products. But I think when you're working at companies and you have C-level banking, for example, right, that's a lot more traditional, and it's much harder to show the immediate impact, the value that you're having by using agile ways of working. So if you have access to the C-level, if you have a touch point with them, I would start by using their language, using their vernacular. I know this is something that Natal and I are really passionate about, right? So using the right language for the right audience. And you want to show how agility can benefit someone at the C-level, right? A lot of times when people think about agile ways of working, they think right away about the frameworks, Scrum, Kanban, great for the team level, great for maybe the department level, not so much the C level. And at that level, I think, to me, in my experience, it comes down to expectations. So again, staying away from words like agile teams, agile organizations, thinking about what it is that you want to achieve, setting these expectations, having some indicators of what you want to achieve, and then helping them walk through that, right? The best agile coaches, business agility coaches, systems coaches that I've worked with, the people that are being coached by them, the people that they're working with, don't realize the impact that they're having, right? Because it's very small things such as using the right language, focusing on what it is that you want to achieve, focusing on things like the problem space before you go into a solution space, and not being dogmatic with frameworks. Like I think there was someone asking about SAFe and less. I think there's value in a lot of little bits of those frameworks, but again, you want to start with the context. And so when you work with upper management, especially at the C level, I think it's really good to discuss how the goal you want to achieve and how agility can help you translate that into a product strategy, and then break that down and include a strategy or a company mission that includes the different departments and the different representations in the company, right? A lot of clients that I worked with focus solely on the end user, right? Solely on the person using your product. And while I think that's a good starting place, I think you also need to focus on things like the people experience that we're talking about, right? I think Richard Branson said it best. If you take care of your employees, they'll take care of your customers, right? So it's having this focus on both the systemic level, the team level, as well as the internal and external customers that you have, and not forgetting about your employees as one of the potential customers.
Excellent. And I think that flows quite nicely into this sort of discussion that we were also looking at having around evolving this environment and this system for helping people be as successful as they can be in their job. And this is the idea is, and this is what I talk a lot with HR teams because they go, oh, well, who's our customer? Well, actually, it is that end customer, but we help people deliver that value through to the end customer. And so understanding where we sit in that environment, in that system is so important, and that everything interconnects. And this is the idea of Agile. It's touching more into, complexity theory, think some theory, where an organization is more this ecosystem, isn't it? That we all kind of link into each other. And therefore, gone are the days where a CEO can say one thing and something happens, because there's so many factors in between that it just doesn't work like that. And if you enable people to make real-time decisions at the team level, it's going to be so much more powerful in what you can achieve. Okay, and then final question from Florence. I did copy a name, that was good. How can HR help an organization in transition, which are on an agile path, and how can they stop them sort of going back to the old performance management system because of this pressure to deliver, especially when there is a change of management? So they're trying to go agile, they're embracing new ways of working, but there's sort of this pressure of going back to old focus on performance due to the need to deliver. What's your thoughts on this one? Interesting question.
Yeah, it seems to me a little bit paradoxical, right? Because if you do want to embrace these agile ways of working, that includes maybe not having these old school or traditional ways of measuring performance at the individual level. So I think the thing that you can start with is maybe opening up the conversation with the leadership team. Again, in terms of what it is that they want to achieve by using these agile ways. Maybe it's not around performance, right? Maybe it's around optimizing the efficiency within certain departments, right? So there, it gives you as a coach, as an HR person, more clarity as to how you can help, what you can help with. And yes, the performance thing, I think that's a big blocker, right? It can be a big blocker where organizations say that they want to embrace the agile mindset, but they're still sticking to performance reviews at the individual level. and using that, using feedback around that. I think a really good stepping stone to move away from that is to break down the feedback into shorter iterations to make it more actionable, right? So rather than doing a generalized survey at the end of the 6 months or at the end of the year, you want to have more frequent weekly, biweekly, monthly cadences of getting that feedback, talking about it, not just getting the feedback and talking about the context behind that feedback, but also using that feedback to reflect and adjust your process, right? So true agility to me boils down to having this Deming cycle or the PDCA cycle, right? Where you plan something, you do it, you check it, and then you adapt or act, right? And to me, this continuous improvement is agility in a nutshell. So with things like feedback, with things like performance, you can take the next step and you can decouple them by having shorter feedback loops and also making them actionable and concrete and doing something with that feedback. So I think that's a good sort of first step to take and move away from the traditional feedback and performance reviews.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's really good. And what I would also say is that you actually need to go and get to know the mindset of some of the senior leaders in this space, because I've been in some of these projects where there's a vision of transforming performance and reward to work more agile, but ultimately the key leader still believes in pay for performance at an individual level. And so if you've got this kind of conflict going on, then you're never on the same kind of page of what you're trying to design. So I would go and tap into that. And then you might need to think about just shifting the dial, just, step by step, rather than the big step to totally re-engineering the way you do performance. And I would definitely agree with Rahul. The first step is trying to create space. So space for the feedback and for Agile to actually, support the delivery and support the work that you're trying to achieve. And then trying to ideally disconnect at least, performance ratings or direct reward to that individual, or at least just some space. So one place I worked, at least taking away the quarter reviews and bonuses meant that there was more space to be talking about feedback during the year, and then the ratings and performance kicked in more at the end. That's still not ideal, but it was a good first step. So these are some of the things to explore. Think of incrementally, because also there's something here where if people have worked in a certain way for so long, a lot of managers, and they're used to giving ratings and talking about ratings as their feedback, it takes a while to support them to talk in a new way. I know one organization that had Scrum Masters and Agile coaches and new ways of working coming in, and managers they said, "Oh, how do I assess the performance of a Scrum Master?" They don't do anything. They just walk around talking to people. So it was really interesting how their concept of how you actually assess someone was very kind of traditional. So you've got to give time to try and build a new culture towards it.
Yeah, completely agree. And if I can just add another point to what you just said, Natal. Also in our previous conversations, we've talked about how important it is to localize that, right? Contextualize and localize the performance and the rewards and the feedbacks. So rather than at an organizational level, having the rewards or the bonuses being approved by the C-level, you want to give that autonomy to maybe the management level at the team level. Yeah, because the managers have a better sense of who's performing, who's bringing value, who's not, right? So prevent this huge bottleneck at the top of the company and really decouple it and to make it more localized and independent, right? So the process is quicker, there's less paperwork involved, and it's more accurate as well, right? Because the people that are responsible for performance or for feedback are walking the gemba, so to say, right? They're in this local context that you want to have.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, is at least making it much more team specific. People, and the people that are doing the work are actually the ones talking about performance and reward is a great first step. Also, transparency, just starting to be much more transparent in this space. We just did a new video. I did one with Tom Hark, and we talked about pay and reward, and that was the practical tip. The more transparent you are about performance and reward and how decisions are made, the more people trust it. And so even just starting with transparency can be really powerful. I know I've done that in some of these projects as well. Okay, so I feel that that's a wrap, Rahul. You've been fantastic as always, and very happy to go in lots of different tangents of the questions that are coming in, which is great. And we've had some great feedback about really concrete examples and really useful conversation, which is what is so fantastic about working with you. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been fantastic. I'm going to get Rahul to say a couple of words and also another shout out, and then I'll say goodbye as well. Over to you, Rahul.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys. It's the time, I guess, went by really quick, and there's so much more I think that we can talk about. And Natal, I know we've talked over and over again about the synergies between people experience and agility. So there's a lot more that I would love to share with you guys. You can get in touch with me through LinkedIn, through my website. I also have a podcast where I interview people in the lean and agile space, such as Natal herself. And so please check out that podcast. It's called Agile Atelier, where you can maybe learn a little bit more on these topics that we've discussed today. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Natal, as well, for having me and for having this really open and interesting conversation. So thanks to you as well.
Pleasure. Thank you. All right. So we love having Meetup. So I hope to see you at the next one. And this is about building a community and learning from each other. So please let us know what you want to focus on next and get in touch if you want to talk more about the topics we've covered. And we will add a few links into the follow-up emails so you can go and do lots of follow-up study. All right. Have a great day, everybody.